Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at my Prince Zuko build. This build's pretty easy to get started right from the start of the game. I started as a bandit, but you can also start as a warrior, which is a good choice because the first thing we're going to want to grab are some curved swords. You can farm these off of skeletons if you need to in the catacombs in Limgrave, or what I opted for is farming for the curved swords from the demi-humans that spawn right under the little bridge where you find Kenneth Haight for the first time. The other thing you're going to need is a finger seal, which you can start with if you started the game as a prophet, or you can buy it from the Round Table Hold, the Twin Maiden husks there. And then one other option would be to pick up the Dragon Communion seal right at the start, which is what I did. But we're not really going to be using the Dragon Incantations for this build, so that one's not really that necessary. Once we're done grabbing those things in Limgrave, we're actually going to head over to Caelid because there's a couple things we need there. The first thing we're going to grab on the way is a Ash of War, Flame of the Redmanes. This is pretty easy to just run in there, grab it, and get out. Another thing we're going to need is a fist weapon, the Spiked Caestus, which we'll just grab from a merchant up in northern Caelid. And then the last thing we'll need is one more Ash of War and a Whetstone blade. These two are the only somewhat challenging things to grab because there's a lot of enemies on the way, and so you just kind of have to run through. Make sure you don't have a lot of runes when you do this because there's some chance you might die and lose those. You're going to want to run down to Redmane Castle. Once you get to that bridge, carefully cross it, and then you're going to follow the path up and around all the way to the back. Once you're at the back, get off of Torrent and crouch so that you can sneak by the bats over to the little scarab there. And make sure you approach him from this right side so that he runs away from you towards the castle. That way when you start attacking him, none of those bats will aggro and you should be able to kill him pretty easily. After you kill him and grab that, you're going to want to climb up the ladder right there, go across the wall, and then you jump down, run through a bunch of enemies. There's an open door towards the end of the path, and you pick up the whetstone knife that we're going to need for enchanting our weapons with flame. Alright, now that we've got our weapons and our Ashes of War, the last thing that we can grab are some of our incantations. A couple of the basic ones we can grab from Brother Quarren at Round Table Hold. You probably won't end up using Catch Flame or Flame Sling all that often because your Ashes of War are just so powerful, but these are good to have and they are situational. There are some cases where you'll want to use them. Once you get to Liurnia of the Lakes and you feel ready to take on the Thief of Fire Adon, you can kill him and it'll give you Flame of the Fell God. This is a really strong fire spell that you can use to open against tougher enemies because it has a pretty decent cast range. And typically what you want to do is sneak up behind them, cast it, and that'll open the fight for you, doing a lot of damage to them. And then the last spell you'll want is Flame Grant Me Strength. I usually use this for tough fights and bosses. It's going to boost your fire attack and physical attack, and so it boosts your damage quite a bit. As far as armor, I went with the Fire Monk set. It's a pretty decent set, plus it's very on theme for this build. The best place I found to farm for this is on the Liurnia Highway. You just go to the site of Grace there, run west to the little camp where they hang out, kill one, fast travel back, and then repeat until you get all the pieces. For your mixed physic, I go with the Flame Shrouding tier. For obvious reasons, most of the damage we're dealing with this build is fire. And then the other one I like is the Stonebarb Cracked tier. You're mostly going to be using your physic before boss fights, and Flame of the Redmanes does a really good job at breaking boss stances, and this one just accelerates that. So usually against tough bosses, you can cast Flame of the Redmanes 2 or 3 times. Aiming for their head makes it more effective, and then that'll cause them to go down and you get a critical hit. This used in conjunction with those Spiked Caestus is really powerful because when you do that critical hit, it helps build up some of the blood loss. And then the last thing is your talismans. You definitely want the Fire Scorpion charm. That one's going to buff your fire damage by 12%. The other one I like to use is the Two Fingers Heirloom to get as much faith as we can, because that's where all of our damage is going to be coming from. And then the third slot is pretty flexible. There's a couple different options that you can do. Another talisman worth considering is the Carrion Filigree Crest. If you're using your weapon skills a lot, which you probably will be, this will be another really good one to choose if you find yourself running out of FP regularly. All right, to get started, you're going to want to enchant your fist weapons with one of the two Ashes of War. You can use these interchangeably. It's sort of personal preference. I think Flame of the Redmane and the Spiked Castus works better. That's typically what I do against bosses, especially if you can bleed them. However, Flaming Strike on those fist weapons just looks awesome, especially with this themed build. Both of these Ashes of War are really strong, though I do think Flame of the Redmanes is a little bit better because it breaks stances just so easily. Plus, the range is a little bit better, and it sort of spreads out in a cone, so you can use it as a frontward AoE attack if you have a bunch of enemies in front of you. Later in the game, once you reach Volcano Manor, there's two more curved swords that you should consider grabbing. One of them is the Scavenger's Curved Sword. This is a good one because it has passive bleed, just like your fist weapons, so if you're swapping between the two, you can continue to build up that hemorrhage effect. Although there's only one of these available, so you'd either have to have a friend drop one for you, or get a second one on your NG Plus game. But I think the best curved sword for this build, because it's really strong, is the Magma Blade. The weapon skill on this is really strong. You can't put any Ashes of War on it, but it does have faith scaling inherently. That's why it's okay to use for this build. If you keep mashing your skill button, you just throw magma out everywhere, and it also does a really good job at staggering opponents. Overall, I'd say this is a moderate difficulty spec to play. Because you are in melee range, you do run the risk of getting hit. It's not like a caster build where you can just sit in the back and deal all your damage. But it's not super hard because the incantations and the weapons do really good damage. And the main focus here is to break enemy stances using your Ash of War. Alright, so how this plays. This is a pretty versatile build. You have two different weapon sets, the fists and the curved swords. I love playing with curved swords because they deal pretty good damage just because of how quickly they can attack. And also they help keep you really mobile. So they help you get in, do an attack, and get back out really quick if you need to. Plus the Ashes of War on this are so strong. These combined with the bleed effect on either your curved sword or your fist weapons helps you take down bosses really quick that are susceptible to bleeding. And even if they're not susceptible to bleeding, pretty much all bosses can be staggered. So if you position yourself correctly and cast 2 or 3 Flame of the Redmanes, you should be able to stagger them and get a critical hit and just rinse and repeat that till the boss dies. These skills on your weapons plus your incantations help you deal with just about every situation in the game. Later in the game, you'll want to grab the Giant's Seal and the Giant's Prayer Book, which will open up a couple new really powerful spells. I haven't quite reached that yet, but that's probably the next thing I'm looking forward to in order to upgrade this toolkit. Okay, let's talk about attributes real quick. For Vigor, you're going to want at least 20, preferably a little bit more than that, because this is a melee build. You're going to be dealing damage up close to enemies. Mind, you want at least 15, preferably 20, so that you can be using your skills and incantations without having to drink a flask every few seconds. Endurance, we don't need too much. Later, once you get the upgraded armor, you're going to need a couple points to prevent yourself from fat rolling. For strength and dexterity, you can just leave them at the lowest amount that you need to equip your weapons. We're not really getting any damage scaling from those. Intelligence and arcane we don't need, and faith is going to be our main stat. This is where we're going to be pumping most of our points because this is going to give us all of our damage. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the build. I got a few more planned that'll be coming out here shortly, so stay tuned for those.